Copper has had its best month in a long time, having reached new all-time highs this past week. What's next for the price of copper? What's next for the demand of copper? And why is it going up? We'll be talking about this theme and the state of copper mining with the next guest, Jason Bontempo, who is the CEO and director of Gladiator Metals, very interesting project based in the north of Canada. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hi, David. It's great to be here. Thank
Your
you.
your project is based in Whitehorse, but you're based in Australia, so opposite corners of the world. But we'll talk about not Australia today. We'll talk about Whitehorse and copper. First, copper. So, as you're aware, copper reached new all-time highs this past week. It's been reported. I was reading this article on Bloomberg. It's been reported that investors are concerned about shortages. They're concerned about inventory issues in China, and they're obviously looking forward to the demand growth prospects of copper. So let's start there. First of all, is it true that copper is facing a shortage? I've been hearing this a lot. How would you evaluate this statement?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that with global government policy, heading towards a net zero carbon, for 2050, and they've even got targets, quite aggressive targets for 2035. That push means electrification. Electrification equals copper and copper requirement. The typical internal combustion car needs 24 kilos, or on average 24 kilos of copper, and an electric vehicle is around 60 kilos. That's just one example of the increase of copper resources that will be required. So, yes, slowly it's starting to sink in, and the demand already is 18 million tons. So if you can imagine, 18 million tons of copper metal is what we are sort of producing now globally. Without electrification, the estimate is we're going to be moving towards 37 million tons by 2050, and that's without the electrification. So, you know, yes, I think the shortages will begin to impact as time goes on.
I want to come back to the supply side because that's obviously your business, the supply of copper. But let's talk about the demand side. What are the major industries that you see using copper going forward?
Well, it's most certainly the electrical vehicle industry. You then will have a significant amount of requirement for grid upgrades for charging. You then also have solar and wind, renewable energy infrastructure, and then storage. I think that storage of power is, you know, local infrastructure, effectively housing large batteries locally to store, you know, renewable energy. So look, they're just four items
Okay.
that you can easily identify.
Just to push back on the EV story a bit, recently, in the past couple months, we've seen a few automakers roll back on their promises to be completely electric by 2026 or 2027, Mercedes being one of them, Audi being another. Some companies are saying it's not possible to meet these deadlines, and so they're just pushing back and they're saying, look, we're going to do our best, but it's not happening at a quickest pace as initially expected. What do you make of this reversal of this trend?
Well, I think it's just that's the reality of wanting to, that the targets were probably overly aggressive. It doesn't take away from the fact that that's where we're moving to. So it really is only a function of timing. It's not a matter of if, but when. And in terms of copper supply for that demand, I don't even think that even on these revised targets, we can meet that demand as is with current mine supply.
Copper demand in artificial intelligence as well, data centers popping up and will continue to use base metals in the construction of their data centers, right? Tell us about this trend.
Well, I mean, at the copper is the best conductor of heat and electricity. It's non-corrosive. It's ease of fabrication. Whatever the industry is that requires electrification, AI being one of them, it's positively correlated. So, there's no question that there'll be demand from AI. There's no question there's has been demand from the building of cloud networks to date. So again, it's just another pressure point for demand on the metal.
I'm going to read this paragraph from a Bloomberg article explaining what happened this week. So, a series of setbacks at major copper mines are fueling fears that a much anticipated production shortfall will arrive earlier than expected. Smelter treatment fees, a gauge of tightness in the ore market, plunged below zero in April, raising the prospect that plants will be forced to cut production to stem losses. Can you tell us about some of these setbacks?
Well, I mean, you're talking about just being able to get, refineries just being able to get feed, and they're not getting feed, so they've got a whole lot of fixed costs and standing still costs, and that costs money to keep the lights, literally keep the lights open, to process ore. So yeah, look, I'm not surprised that they're attracting or they're competing for copper ores to process, so that their refinery is busy and someone else's isn't.
Yeah.
Really interesting. First time ever. Yeah.
I mean, this came in a couple of months ago. It's not recent news, but we're talking about First Quantum Minerals, perhaps, right in their Panama mine, one of the largest copper mines globally. That halted production earlier this year, late last year. This mine alone was expected to produce about 400,000 tons of copper annually. So my question is, suppose some of these larger mines, I guess, resume production at some point. Could it not stand to reason that this copper short squeeze that we're seeing could just revert back to normal?
Well, look, there's always volatility in metal markets, David. We're not, I'm not looking at this from short term. The reality is that on the long term, the demand for copper is completely overwhelming right now. And considering when you invest, you are investing in the development of, say, copper resources, that occurs over 3 to 5 years, bringing into production 5 to 7 years. So really, I think the key data to look at is the long-term requirement. I think there'll always be short-term volatility. I won't speak to it because there's so many factors that drive it.
Last year, the U.S. Added copper to its critical mineral list. There's a lot of the Department of Energy, that is. There's a lot of criteria that go into whether or not a mineral is considered critical or not. Right. First of all, it has to have a high risk of supply chain disruption. It has to serve an essential function in several technologies, and the technologies have to create, transmit, reserve, or conserve energy. Now let's talk about copper and how it fits into these criteria. First of all, is there an actual risk to the supply chain of copper globally?
Well, yes. I mean, you only have to look back on a significant amount of literature that's been written over the last couple of years, where the investment in exploration for copper has not been there. Large, typically copper projects are dominated by large miners. They are mining very, very, very low grades at bulk tonnage to produce most of the world's copper. And on top of that, a lot of it comes out of in one particular region of the world, being Chile. So, the lack of investment into exploration over the last 20 years is easily identifiable, and that is why there is it coming. That is why it's being named critical, because we need to actually find some more. It's not that easy to find, and hence the critical nature.
So here's some actual numbers that we can cite. So according to McKinsey and Company, electrification is expected to increase annual copper demand from about 25 million tons now to 36.6 million tons by 2031, with supply then forecasted to be around 30.1 million tons, creating a 6.5 million ton shortfall at the start of the next decade. So we're talking about a shortfall coming up in a few years. What is the direct impact on the copper market as soon as a shortfall hits?
Well, the direct impact is the price of copper. The copper metal price should rise significantly, and ultimately attract enough investment to explore for more and find more. So it's a matter of where you find yourself in that, on that timeline as an investor. And I would have thought now's the time to be an investor into exploration and finding more.
And just to go back to what you were talking about for electrification, the green uses of copper in particular had a 4% share in copper consumption in 2020. This is expected to more than quadruple to 17% by 2030, according to Goldman Sachs. Okay, so green uses. Can we talk about some green uses besides EV? Are we talking about solar panels? Are we talking about
Yeah,
renewable energy?
primarily. Yeah, I mean, yes, primarily, solar and wind, renewable energy infrastructure, very large consumers, and requirement for copper, to develop.
What can be done about this shortfall? I mean, price aside, yeah, I guess it's great for long-term copper investors, but we still need to address this problem if we're going to advance technologies in these fields, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I think quite simply, it's the investment into exploration and the discovery of more copper resources. Um, that primarily, and hence why I'm here talking to you, David, and hence why over the last 2 years, we've been preparing and working on, and bringing, the Whitehorse Copper Project to market, for this very reason, to discover more copper resources.
So my first question to you before we talk more about gladiators and your long-term vision is why Whitehorse? I mean, we know that a lot of the highest grade copper deposits in the world are in South America, for example, West Africa, for example. Why did you pick Whitehorse?
Well, look, first of all, I had a really, really strong focus on first world jurisdictions, in terms of political safety, and looking around the globe. Canada is a resource-rich nation, and look, I had a little bit of history because I'd been to the Yukon before. In particular, Whitehorse. Well, the Whitehorse Copper Project was a previous producer, so that's an excellent start. And it was mined by Hudbay, a famous Canadian mining company, from 67 to 82. So it had pedigree. It already had proven ability to deliver into a mining environment. What attracted me is that Hudbay had only really just scratched the surface. They'd only focused on one area within the 35-kilometre long prospective area that is the Whitehorse Copper Belt. And so when you rise above and you have a look at that 35-kilometre long belt, there were a number of prospect areas that needed to be worked, and explored, because we think there's a significant amount more of copper
On your website,
resources.
it's billed as a tier one jurisdiction. Can you just explain to the layman watching this what exactly does that mean?
Well, tier one jurisdiction in terms of environmental practice, in terms of government regulation, skilled labour force, infrastructure, the ability for supply, to name a few.
Well, Yukon has been named one of the world's best mining jurisdictions by the Fraser Institute, for example. It's on their list. What makes Yukon unique?
Well, I mean, look, it has a history of mining. Particularly it was, had the Klondike Gold Rush era up at Dawson City. So, it's been the mining culture, and mining has been ingrained in the province, for well over 100 years. In fact, the initial mining, I mentioned Hudbay. That was a significant mining production from Whitehorse, but it dates back to the turn of last century, where there was some very, very high grade copper being mined at surface at the Whitehorse Copper Belt, and in fact is the reason why the city was settled, was because of the copper.
Okay.
So huge amount of pedigree.
Comment. Can you comment on the grade of the copper that you have?
Yeah. So look, the style of geology is allows the well, allows for a very high concentration of copper per ton of rock. So per every ton uh, of ore, we are seeing on average somewhere between 1.5% to 2% copper. Now that could be regarded as 6 to 8 times higher than mined grades of some of these very, very large bulk tonnage deposits operated by the larger mining companies, where they're working on 0.15 or to 0.3% of copper. So that's the difference. That's the key difference. So we are talking um, significantly lower tonnage, so minimal tonnage, but much higher grade.
Okay. And what are you targeting for your initial resources this year?
Well, look, overall, we see that there are 3 or 4 very advanced prospect areas on the Whitehorse Copper Belt, which sort of over a strike of 10 kilometers within that 35 kilometers, which is, very, very, very excellent proximity and nearby to each other. We can see already that there is 20 to 30 million tons at around a 2% copper equivalent grade. And our target for the region or for the belt would be over 100 million tons at that 2% number. So when you start talking about in situ, or what is the value of that metal effectively that sits in the ground, um, is it 15 to 20 billion dollars US of that nature, something of that ilk. Yeah.
So I think an investor might be wondering if you're operating on a deposit that or an area that was producing in the past. You mentioned it has a history of producing copper. Well, is that your ultimate plan? Is that your game plan to ultimately start production one day?
The game plan right now is to discover enough copper resources um, for for the consideration of whether it can be developed or not. So that is the game plan. Until we get to that point of understanding what we have, then can we move forward into a mining scenario? Absolutely. We'll consider that at that point. But right now, it's all about discovery, and that's the leverage for investors. That is the most significant multiple of leverage and sensitivity for investors right now.
Can you comment on your current cash position and your roughly your runway timeline?
So the current cash position is 3 million Canadian, and we're currently now assessing a significant number of results that we have drilled. We've drilled close to 10,000 meters over the last 3 months, 3 to 4 months, and we're now assessing those results. For example, we recently issued a news release showing that at one of our prospects, being Cowley Park, our most advanced prospect, we just issued some drill results showing that geological model is growing and extending. So we're looking and planning forward to the next 12 to 18 months, where we'd like to think that we can complete a significant amount of drilling at Cowley Park to officially report a resource under the 43-101 requirements.
So I'm looking at your financial statements from the year-end 2023, right? And as of November 30th, 2023, in the 3 months ending that period, exploration costs were $1.5 million. I'm just doing the math here. If you have $3 million on hand, are you expecting to burn through your cash by this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we're an exploration company, so we have to raise money from the markets to then invest in the ground and add value, to the asset. So when that is required, is always the question. But right now we have enough to keep going, based and assess what our next steps are.
Would you
Based
would you
on.
not want to take advantage of the high copper price right now and do another round of fundraising?
Oh, look, I'm sure that there'll be plenty of investors that would like to
Mhm.
take advantage.
For sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so we'll just assess that situation ongoing.
I'm wondering if the rise in the gold price, I know gold isn't copper, but I'm just wondering if the rise in the gold price recently has also improved sentiment in junior mining overall, translating into the copper space as well. Have you seen any
Definitely.
changes? Yeah.
Definitely, when there's lots of gold bugs, lots of, the the number of gold investors is enormous in capital markets. So if they're feeling wealthier and they're feeling richer, or if they've in fact actually realized some gains, then that tends to flow into other metals for sure.
Well, investors picking companies to invest in, they look at a couple things, right? Jurisdiction, which we've talked about, the assets themselves, which we talked about. The final thing will be management. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional background, and maybe some of the other directors on your team.
Yep. Yeah. So look, I've been involved in junior resource companies for the last 20 years, essentially originating projects, raising capital, managing the exploration and development phase. I've had three of my junior companies taken over in that period, and also dealt on a number of asset sales, and some of these projects have moved in to become mines as well. My fellow board members, Darren Devine, a very successful lawyer, and also has been involved with some successful junior resource companies that have been taken over, or one in particular been that's gone very well is K92 Gold. And then we have Sean Kunkun, who is also another director of the company and who's actively involved in the junior resources market in Canada. At the moment, he's the CEO of Dolly Varden, which is advancing silver and gold in BC. So, yeah, certainly a lot of experience on the board, and also a significant amount of experience with our exploration team. Marcus Harden, who's our president, formerly of First Quantum, a very known name in copper. Was used to go by the nickname at First Quantum as the ore finder. So I'm glad to say that we've got him working for Gladiator, and also Kel Nielsen, a very experienced geologist, as well, with over 30 years experience. And everyone's predominantly the management team and the operational team are based in Whitehorse. Our board, outside of me, are based in Vancouver. So it's just me that sits outside of Canada. I essentially had the relationship with the vendors, and who not just vendors but are our partners in this project and our major shareholders in Gladiator, which are H. Coyne and Son. They're a very successful, prominent local family, business family in Whitehorse, and successfully run a global drilling business, Kluani Drilling, which is very, very handy for us to have our major partner as also a drilling company, which keeps our costs down, but also our accessibility and logistics ease as well. Also, they are the family are of First Nation origin, with one of our key First Nations in Whitehorse being the Kwanladan. And that always helps with relationships and consultation as well. So, yeah, it's not just the board, but we've got an excellent technical team operating in Whitehorse, but also our partners and our vendors as well.
Can you break down the shareholder structure? So you mentioned there was a family office. Roughly what percentage of shares is owned by private institutions or families, the board versus the rest of the general public?
Yeah, board and management would be around about 35%. Institutional, sophisticated resource institutional, which includes Tribeca Investments. It includes McKinsey. It includes APAC out of Hong Kong. We're very lucky to boast these sophisticated resource investors. They'll be about 25 to 30% as well. Our partners, H Coin, they'll be sitting at around 12 to 13%. So there's lots of skin in the game with Gladiator for sure.
Okay, so final question then, Jason. There's a lot of copper deposits out there, hundreds. all around the world, in different jurisdictions. What makes Gladiator Metals stand out?
What makes Gladiator Metals stand out is the Whitehorse Copper Project, as previously discussed, is a very high-grade copper project. But on top of that, it's surrounded by excellent infrastructure, being on the western outskirts of Whitehorse City. So, why do you need to own Gladiator Metals? Because we are going to significantly drill this project over the next 24 months with the sole goal of discovery. And with discovery comes the leverage of increased valuation. And between its high grade and its proximity to this excellent infrastructure means the reality of it actually being developed one day is very real in a wonderful first-tier jurisdiction, being the Yukon province within Canada.
For recent updates on company news, where can we go to follow Gladiator Metals?
Yeah, so to find all the information you need, please go to the gladiatormetals.com.
Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate your time today.
Okay, thanks, David. Bye.
Don't forget to like the video and follow Gladiator Metals in the links down below.